Welcome to the explainer. You hear this idea a lot, right? That there's hope for a return to traditional values. But what if that's actually impossible? Today, we're breaking down a pretty provocative argument that says the pendulum of society, well, it just can't swing back. Okay, so here's our game plan for unpacking this idea. First, we'll look at that common hope for a traditional comeback. Then, we're going to dive into the core counter-argument that the pendulum has swung way too far. We'll dig into the three big historical power shifts that supposedly locked us in, see why the system won't just correct itself, and finally, we'll look at some really stark predictions for what's being called a future without husbands.
All right, so to really get the main argument here, we first have to understand the idea that it's pushing back against, and that's this widespread hope for a traditionalist comeback. You know the idea I'm talking about, right? You hear it from a lot of commentators. It's this belief that society kind of moves in cycles, and if we just put in enough effort collectively, we can fight our way back to a more traditional way of life. It's a really powerful message of hope, for sure, and a clear call to action for a lot of people.
Okay, so now let's flip the coin and look at the central thesis of the source material we're covering today. And it paints a very, very different picture of where things are headed.
And this is the question that really gets to the heart of this entire argument. What if this isn't a cycle at all? The core idea here is that the changes we've seen in society aren't temporary. They're a permanent, one-way street.
So the crucial point here is the assertion that these fundamental, irreversible shifts have already happened. And that makes a simple return to the past pretty much impossible. The argument is that the underlying incentives of our entire society have been completely rewired.
So, to understand this argument, you really have to look at three key historical moments that the speaker identifies as absolute game changers for the structure of society.
According to the source, the old social order wasn't undone overnight. Nope, it happened in three really distinct stages. First, you have a huge shift in political power back in the 1920s when women got the right to vote. Then, about 50 years later, you get this rapid one-two punch. Women gained massive economic power through easy access to credit, and at the same time, reproductive power through no-fault divorce and birth control.
And this slide, well, it really shows you the source's conclusion from those shifts. The argument is that the old system, where men held structural authority, hasn't just been changed, it's been completely flipped on its head. The new dynamic, according to this view, is one where women now hold the dominant position across political, economic, and reproductive power.
Okay, so if these changes are so profound, the next logical question is, why doesn't the system just self-correct? Well, the source provides an answer, and it's rooted in economics.
The argument here is simple. You just got to follow the money. The claim is that too many powerful institutions have a really strong financial incentive to keep things exactly the way they are. Divorce lawyers, credit card companies, even the government. This view claims they all profit from the current social structure, which creates this massive financial barrier to any kind of real change.
Now, the source uses this statistic as a pretty stark example of the new economic reality we're in. The claim is that 1 in 10 women under the age of 25 are on platforms like OnlyFans. This is presented as direct evidence of a new financial and cultural landscape that isn't just different from traditional models, it's actively moving away from them. And what's really interesting is how this argument frames modern female success. The source highlights these new forms of media influence and wealth as being fundamentally at odds with, and maybe even hostile to, traditional values. They're seen as representing a new ideal for young women to aspire to.
All right, let's get to the final part of the argument and see how all this culminates in a forecast for the future, specifically the future of relationships and family.
So where does all this lead? Well, according to the source, the future isn't a reversal of these trends, it's an acceleration. This projection shows marriage becoming a kind of luxury good, reserved only for the very elite. Meanwhile, for everyone else, traditional family structures continue to break down, and technology, like AI relationships, steps in to fill that void.
And this is the speaker's blunt, unfiltered summary of the argument's conclusion for the average person. It's a statement that reframes the idea of a long-term partnership not as a societal norm, but as a temporary and increasingly rare arrangement.
So ultimately, the argument we've explored today presents a really challenging, almost deterministic vision. It completely dismisses any hope of that pendulum swinging back to the past, and instead argues that we're on a one-way track. So the final question it leaves us with isn't just whether this is a prediction or a warning, but what, if anything, can even be done about it.